This happened Friday. I'm still loopy on pain, so bear with me, my best friend. And I wanted to go on a hike, simple and innocent enough. I'd been canceling lately due to personal things, and she was about to go out of town for the weekend to see her long-distance partner. So I wanted to spend some time together. Before she left, I forgot to put on socks and was more worried about getting out the door. Quickly we picked a nearby state park and drove about a half hour out of our way to get there. It's a gorgeous little pocket in our town with a small lake and a few mild trails. Part of the way down the lakeside trail, we both realized we definitely needed socks, and she had lost her phone, so we had to double back on our way back to the parking lot. Is when we noticed him the first time. The car had been there since we arrived. I know, because we had to walk through the cloud of exhaust on our first trip down the trailhead. It was the fact that he hadn't moved at all yet that piqued our interest. We minded our business, assumed he was waiting to pick someone up, and got to the car hike round 2 time to try again. When I say we took this hike at our own pace, I'm not kidding. We stopped for every puddle, broken bench, mushroom, weird log, and nice view. We came across what would take some people 40 to 60 minutes took us almost an hour and 40. So obviously, seeing that the car had still not moved set off a few alarm bells. We walked up to the window for the first time and saw an older man, early 60s, with a bushy mustache and glasses, asleep in the front seat. We agreed that with the cold weather and the fact that we could still hear and feel the heater in his car at full blast with the windows closed, our biggest concern was carbon monoxide poisoning. We knocked a few times, then more loudly. Then my friend shouted a bit to try to get his attention. No response. I started getting a bad feeling in my stomach, realizing that this was turning into more of a serious situation than we may have realized initially. We run over to the camp host's RV, but no one is around, so it's time for 911. She calls and gives our location, and the operator has to go through a checklist. Can we get his attention? No. Is he breathing? We can't tell. He's wearing several layers and a puffy vest. Okay, it's time to open the door and interact. I mask up and get ready, as between the two of us only I know CPR this entire time. Not a soul who has walked by has given a second glance. Nobody before us or after us checked on him. Nobody who saw us frantically call 911 or bang on the windows, and there were people who walked by and looked at us, even for a second, stopped to see if things were all right. She shakes him one last time as a precaution and steps back, informing me that the operator has asked us to get him out of the car and perform chest compressions. I can't feel a pulse or see a breath, but the heater is on full blast, so he is warm, and I can't entirely tell. One look at his hand and I knew everything I needed to know, but on the off chance I was wrong and he was still alive, I look around, make sure the parking brake's on, and turn off the ignition so I can focus on removing this larger man. Enter the up immediately. The car starts rolling backwards. We're on a slight hill that leads straight to the water, and he is facing away from it. My initial thought is, oh, this guy's alive, and I'm going to push him into the lake and kill him. I'm frantically running sideways, pushing with all my strength and desperately trying to find the ear. I swear to God this car didn't have one. My friend is screaming and pulling on the car. The poor operator is still on the line, having to listen to all of this, and then whoosh, there goes my footing. The street is basically just compacted mud in rocks, so it was only a matter of time, I suppose. I don't really know what happened to me and can only get a good idea based off of my friend's account and my injuries pattern. I twisted my knee first and dislocated it pretty immediately. That pop is not something I will be forgetting anytime soon. Then, as the car was obviously not going to stop for my clumsy ass, my right hip hit the ground. I got dragged fully under the door of this little blue Chrysler for a good 15 to 20 feet of this hill, ripping through my jeans and both shirts. I then rolled onto my right side for one last bounce and got spat out underneath, ass over tiak kettle. Obviously, I'm in a lot of pain, but the adrenaline is still coursing through me, and I have to know if he's going into the lake or not. Well, I'm not a religious person by any means, but damn Jesus took that wheel. The car made a sharp left and backed up into some trees. The guy in the car barely jiggled with impact. My friend, who's still on the phone with 911, runs up to me to check on me, but I shoo her off to look at the man. I'm totally okay. I wasn't, by the way. She took one look at my back and mumbled, "F Chris is going to kill me," and then ran off. I didn't even know anything was wrong with my back. I tried to stand up and feel my knee pop for a second louder time. I could absolutely feel two things moving against each other inside, and immediately I fell to the ground. This very kind man with the most luxurious Shah-Wi's hair came and helped pick me up and get me out of the road so the ambulance that had just arrived could go by. These paramedics were amazing. In the blink of an eye, they got this man out on his back, stripped his shirt, and began CPR. In another blink, they had all their gear set up around them. My friend signed over her phone number and ran back up to me. We got in the car with a bit of a struggle and Googled the nearest urgent care. After a half-hour drive, they took one look at me and sent me to the ER. My boyfriend took over from there and got me to the hospital. I dislocated and relocated my knee, cracked a few ribs, severe road rash on the majority of my upper back and on my right hip, severe bruising on my left hip. They gave me 10 mg of oxycodone in the ER for my DEBREM and overall pain, and I was still in so much pain I was nauseated and dizzy. On checkout, they gave me a script for 15 milligrams of morphine. Still on morphine, I'm about a 6 on the pain scale. Eventually, as I'm getting the rock splinters pulled out of my ass and back, my friend texts me with news. They identified the man, pronounced him dead, and found his next of kin. The sheriff was so kind and thanked us profusely for what we had done and said he wished more people like us existed. He also cleared us of any responsibility for the fate of his car. I've been checking the local obituaries every day since Friday to see if he comes up. I would love to know more about who he was and maybe even contact the family and let them know he was peaceful and looked happy and was not in pain or anything when we got there. Then I remember what happened to the car, usually turn a shade of crimson and forget about the idea of reaching out to anyone. 1 year ago, I 17 befriended a young man who was 18 on Discord. We matched each other's humor and had quite a few things in common. He was secretive about himself, so it was always a surprise when he opened up, which kept me deeply invested in getting to know him. We got along very well and spent lots of time chatting and discussing things. I was introduced to 2 more of his friends, well, more like classmates. Their names were Steve and Luke. Their little trio had a strange dynamic. Steve and the young man I much later got to know is Tom after he finally revealed his name were quite close and tended to treat Luke as their little plaything. This made me feel rather empathetic towards Luke, and I tended to take his side more in arguments. This led to them often joking that he'd show up to my house with flowers if I kept defending him. There was a slight rivalry between everyone in the trio. My arrival only made things more tense as all of them started to badmouth each other to me in private. Eventually, Tom and Steve began to avoid Luke and prevent him from joining our conversations. This continued for a while, until Tom suddenly became strange towards me. He started to fully delete all messages he sent me and unadded me everywhere. This happened a few times before I was fed up with all of them. I broke ties and honestly should never have picked them up again. I then received a message from someone, "Hey, remember me? We used to talk. Who's this?" I asked. "It's me, Steve, Tom, and I started a Minecraft server. Do you want to join?" He asked. I eagerly agreed and got invited into the corresponding Discord server. There were a few others in there who are not relevant to the story, mind you. I got along with most of the people in there, but especially with Steve, even outside of the Minecraft server and public group voice chats. We spent time together. We went down internet rabbit holes. Our mutual interest in these rabbit holes filled much of the conversation topics when we talked. This changed after the 17th of March 24, when at 8 p.m. I received 8 missed calls from Steve with the text, "Pick up, you'll never forget this. Hold on, give me a moment." I said, "Pick up? When do I ever call you randomly? It's important." The ongoing call on the 17th at 8:50. It was 1 minute. Steve turned on his camera and asked me a short question that genuinely still makes me feel nauseous. "This is your house, right?" I remained silent for a good second and tried to deny it was my house. Then another voice spoke up, "Belonging to Tom. It was surprisingly easy tracking you down from your mother's Facebook backyard view pictures. When I tell you I felt sick to the bone, I remember quickly putting on a sweater and grabbing my phone. At the time, my mind worked on autopilot and I just wanted to get away from them ASAP. My mother asked me why I was going out in the middle of March at 9 p.m. during a rainy night. At the time, I lied to her that friends were there. "No way, you're actually real," was the first thing Tom said when I opened the wooden gate in our garden. Both men stood with their backs to the streetlights, and I didn't have the balls to shine my phone flashlight onto them. I remained close to the door as Steve offered me a puff of their cigarette. I declined politely and stood there in awkward silence as the two men stared at me. The conversation was very dry and not deep. Every minute I stayed made my stomach twist more and more. It felt so off. I stayed there for about 30 minutes before they asked me, "Do you want to go with us to our car?" I immediately declined and turned around to close the wooden gate to the garden again before I could. Tom quickly added that it was a joke and insisted on drinking a cup of coffee inside with my parents. I declined and desperately tried to get them to leave. After that, at 9:32, I received a message that said, "Thanks man, I feel unsafe in my own home now. JK, sorry, hope we didn't scare you badly," was the response. I brushed the weird event off and went on with my life, though I did find myself checking more often if there were people outside waiting for me. On the 29th of April, 2024, I received a message saying, "Are you home?" "No," I responded. "Are you sure the lights in your room are on?" I replied with, "I'm not home, go away, but I can see you'll look at the window on your left." I looked and I saw them this time in daylight. They had once again showed up to my doorstep together. This was my first time seeing their faces. Steve waved and nervously smiled. I nodded and said to them, "What is it this time? You want to go to Tom's house together with us?" "No, I don't. Please don't waste your gas driving here anymore." They did not relent. Steve begged for me to allow him to go inside to fill his water bottle and also for Tom to piss. I told them no, pointed for Tom to piss somewhere in the field. Eventually I gave in and took Steve's water bottle inside to fill up. When I came back, they were suddenly satisfied and happy to go back to their car and leave. Of course not before a weird request. "May I give you a handshake?" When I tell you it was awkward. Humans have this sensor that tells you how long it's okay to shake someone's hand before it becomes weird. However, he didn't possess this a solid 4 seconds. He held my hand only to make the joke that he will never wash his hands again. On the 6th of May, 2024, I received a message that said, "Hey, we need to talk. I really want to tell you something." After a long conversation, it finally came through what their intentions were. Steve told me he liked me. I quietly listened as he told me everything. The worst part of it was that he knew that I had a boyfriend as well. I politely declined his confession and decided that it was enough. I was going to cut all ties with these people. Following that decision, multiple alt accounts sent me messages apologizing, but I never responded to them. The 15th of June 2024, my birthday, a card dropped on the doormat. On the front of it read, "For all the tears and pain grief also gives you emotional gain." Inside of it was a short text, "Happy birthday, have fun, look in your cabinets." It was a funeral grievance card, but after all of this happened, I never heard anything more. So weird. Discord duo, let's not meet again ever. A few years ago, I would stop several times a week at a gas station on my way to work. It was nearly always the same attendant, and she and I would chat as well as greet the other regulars filtering through during the early hours of the morning. She knew my cigarette brand and would have them sitting on the counter for me when she saw me coming. And man would usually show up around the same time and grab a few energy drinks. We would exchange pleasantries about work, our spouses, and pets. I didn't always get gas there because I worked over the state line and it was cheaper in the other state. Around this time I went through a divorce and I switched jobs, which meant that stopping at this gas station was no longer a part of my normal routine. Around a year later, I was driving by the area with someone and I noticed that not only had the gas station shut down, but it had been demolished and the area had grown over in a quick time. I said something about how the area had been naturalized very quickly and was met with confusion. According to them, there had never been a gas station there. I inquired with several other people after this exchange, and they all agreed that there had never been anything built on this piece of land. I'm sure it was the right place because it's located on a main road right across from a shopping center. There was no mistaking the location for any other place. So what happened? A ghost gas station, parallel universe, glitch in the matrix? I honestly have no idea, but it has bothered me ever since. An update to answer some of the questions. I doubt that there is an address. It's just a wooded fig vacant lot off Queen Street in Martinsburg, West Virginia, close to the Dunkin' Donuts. It would have been around the year 2013 or 2014. One of the other people I spoke to about it worked for and was friends with the owner of the land, and they said there had never been development there. It may not have been a large town, but not so small that I'd ever seen the people that were there every morning. Before or since beyond knowing the guy that came in around the same time as me. As the energy drink guy, I never got a name or anything the cashier's name was. Something very innocuous like Carol, possibly the same person that said it. Had never been developed, also told me that it was a popular cardboard village for the local homeless. It's true, you could see their tents and the owner left it vacant so they had somewhere to set up camp. I'll look at Google Maps and see if there's any information for a quick second update. Yes, to those who have looked, it's the wooded area behind the Duncan. It may have been King Street, not Queen. There are only 3 main streets, the other being Winchester Avenue, and it's definitely not Winchester. It's been over a decade and at least 3 banks ago, so I can't look up any statements. They would have been paper back then anyway, and I would have most likely been using cash due to a controlling partner. Even if I had control of my card, I wouldn't have wanted him to know what and where I was buying anything. Also, it is West Virginia and a drug user SL homeless encampment, so yeah, there is probably something weird happening there, having been raised in southern West Virginia. I maintain that the area of West Virginia isn't really West Virginia, but still the foothills of the Appalachians, so creepy stuff happens there. So here's my final conclusion. Many of you have found the vacant lot where this gas station was situated behind the Duncan and across from the retirement SL assisted living home community gardens or something like that. As far as I or the internet sleuths can tell, there has never been a business there. I don't really have an explanation for anyone. I am sure of the location because it was a straight shot to 81 going to work every morning, and I never left view of the main road. And as I stated before, it's not a large town or difficult to navigate as long as you stay on those 3 main roads, so I'm leaving it there. For now, I've known since the first time I noticed it had disappeared that it was something supernatural, and being an Appalachian native, we don't really question those things. I just wanted to share my experience and see if anyone else had similar happenings. Thanks everyone for your detective work and sharing your experiences with me. Keep it spooky. Today in the afternoon, I was walking in the downtown area of my city. It's not uncommon to see beggars or people in need asking for spare change, so when I saw a skinny man talking with 2 other guys, I didn't think much of it. It was the same direction I was headed, so I had to pass nearby. He noticed me. After the 2 guys left, I continued walking at the same rhythm while he started walking to me, and then next to me. I thought I knew the usual drill. He would ask for spare change to take public transport. I would smile at him, hand him some coins, and he would leave, but it didn't happen that way. I could observe him better now that he was near. He was skinny with a prematurely wrinkly face, sallow, damaged skin, and a sort of nervous energy. In short, he looked like a hard drug user during a sober moment. I tend to treat drug addicts and drunk folks that I find in real life in a chill manner, so they don't tend to feel judged or react aggressively, so I kept a pleasant attitude while he gave his speech on how he was in need of bus money because he wanted to go back to his state. He had slept on the street yesterday and he was desperate. He acted friendly and joked, but there was something different to the usual beggars. He was more shameless in his attitude. I started taking out coins to see his reaction. He started saying how he really wanted to go back and not to sleep outside, how I look like a chill dude and maybe I could give him more. The spare change I will usually give people is 5 pesos, which is equivalent to a quarter of a US dollar. He said he needed 350 to go back. He then started getting insistent but still friendly, but my spidey senses knew things were off. He put something in his pocket, showed me his hands, and spoke about not wanting to get into any bad things, how desperate he was, that I looked like a cool guy and I could help him. The sidewalk of the street we were walking on was void of other people, and his behavior, though friendly, was strange. I tried to remain calm, open, and started slowly increasing the quantity I was saying I'd give him, looking like I was thinking about it. I don't know, maybe I can give you a 100. I don't know if I can do 300. Telling him, just trying to haggle. Then he starts telling me stories, how this one time he got shanked. He showed me a huge scar on his neck, and while he was gesticulating, I noticed something hidden in his hand, some dark square thing with a parting in the middle. This guy had sheathed the blade. He never went aggressive. He didn't spring the blade or threaten. He just kept talking to me like I was a stranger in a bar, so I followed his cue. Reacted shocked when he told me about the scar. laughed at his jokes and joked back while also increasing the quantity I said I could give him and thinking how to get out of it unharmed. In the end, I only gave him 190. Of the 350 he wanted, the blade didn't come out, no threats were made. He even thanked me and told me if I ever needed help, I would only need to call him and he would stab anyone who gave me any trouble. He also said, if you ever need me, just go over to the other neighborhood and ask for Kevin. They know me there. Tell me who is bothering you, and if you hear they got shank, it was me. He then left after acting as if we were buddies. I don't know if that is his MO or if he really was willing to mug me at knife point, but then he changed his mind when I didn't give him any attitude. It was 10 minutes later that my mind finished processing what just happened and how wrong things could have gone. In a different universe it could have been worse, but I kept my phone, my wallet, and only lost the equivalent of $10. So drug guy, I know things were cordial, but please let's not ever meet again. When I graduated high school in 2008, I was kind of at loss on what to do with my life. I got a job at a local convenience store working night shift, and for about 8 months I really enjoyed it. My parents and friends were always concerned about me getting robbed or murdered, and rightfully so, but I never had an issue with anyone. After about a year in, I finally experienced the encounter that made me change my life. It was a pleasantly cool late September evening, and at about 2:35 a.m. the door opens and this skinny, frail figure of a young woman comes in. I'll never be able to forget her. If it wasn't for the way she was acting, she honestly would have been kind of cute. She had a collarbone waterfall of brown hair, tan skin, an attractive figure, and she was wearing a tight fitting dark gray tank top. I'd say she was in her late 20s or early 30s. But it was her eyes that really captivated me, and not in a good way. The woman had this blank and distant stare. It was like she was an expressionless shell moving purely on robotic instinct. She didn't say hi, howdy, what's up doc, or anything even after I greeted her from just like 4 feet away. Honestly, I just assumed she was high or on something. She moved past the front counter towards a little household supply aisle we had. She picked up a little bag of cat food and turned back towards me, staring me straight in the eyes so intently that I thought she was about to pull a gun and shoot me. What she did was honestly much worse, though. She got to the front counter, never breaking her silence or gaze. Even after I tried talking with her, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a fire $5 bill, and like 3/4 with tax, it was still a little short of the price, but I take $1 out of my wallet and stick it in the cash register. Later she was starting to creep me out after I took the money and rang her up. She didn't move. She just stood there staring at me without even blinking. I tried speaking to her again, but this time she brought the cat food up and opened it with the littlest ease I've seen a package of pet food get opened ever. By this time I'm just standing in silence trying to figure out what the hell she's doing. Her gaze is unflinching, and she reached into the bag and pulled out a big handful of cat food, staring at me as blank and expressionless as the very second she had entered the store. She shoved the whole hand of pet food into her mouth and started crunching away. Bits and pieces of the cat food dropped from her lips and onto the floor. I wanted to say something, but I was just too flabbergasted to even get my voice out of my throat. Finally, after a couple of minutes of chewing on her cat food, the woman just turned and walked out of the store holding on to the bag of pet food. My boss pulled up camera footage of the incident the following morning before I clocked out. He said he'd seen the woman before, but only once in his 5 years of employment there, he told me, and I kind of think this was a lie, that she was a crazy woman who lived in an old melon in the city cemetery. He said the cops knew about her, and as part of their initial nightly patrols would go and check on her to make sure she wasn't dead. That was the night that made me decide to go to a trade school. I never want to work at a gas station again. Every so often she still appears in my nightmares, just standing there staring at me with deep blank eyes, crunching on a handful of cat food. No, I never want to meet her again. Full disclosure, this happened about 10 years ago, but I still can't believe how lucky I was to get away. I'm female. I was 16 and running late for school. As usual, walking down the road, I noticed a dark green car with tinted windows slowly following behind me. This was a residential community, and it was not unusual UAL for people to drive slowly. It was around 9 a.m. on a weekday, so I naively figured there was no danger as I hurried towards the bus Stop arriving at the bus stop. It had started to rain, so I decided to stand in the small glass bus shelter to wait for the bus. The creepy green car stopped in front of the bus stop. The driver got out and approached me in the bus shelter. Now this bus shelter was so small there was only room for 2 people. He stood in the entrance and grabbed each side of the shelter, trapping me inside. He was very large and extremely physically intimidating. Something about his dead eyes sent chills through my entire body. He asked if I was familiar with the area. I responded, yes, I was. He asked if I was going to school. I responded, yes, I was. He then asked if he could drive me to school so I could show him the way. Call it intuition, but something in my head was screaming not to get in that car with him. I politely declined his offer and asked if he needed help with directions or something. Suddenly he lunged at me, grabbing my arm. He pulled me out of the bus shelter towards his car. I started screaming as he kept insisting it would be faster to drive. By the grace of God, the bus pulled up at this exact moment. All my instincts told me to fight. I clawed at his face. I kicked him. I bit him. I contorted my body until he loosened his grip on my arm. Once free, I leapt on the bus as though my life depended on it. The driver asked if I was okay, but I couldn't reply. I ran to the back to find seat and cried quietly in the corner as the bus carried me to school. All day I sat in class and said nothing about what happened to me. When I got home from school, I told my parents what happened. They were horrified, especially after I showed them the bruise from the man's hand on my arm. We called the police. An officer arrived late that evening and took my statement. He said there had been several similar incidents in the area. He asked if I could come to the station and look at some pictures to identify the culprit. The following week, my mom and I head into the police station. The officer sets us up with a computer and we start to scroll through the mug shots. There were so many. Not only was it discouraging to realize how many known sex offenders there are close by, but after a while all the FAES blurred together. Losing hope of identifying the guy, we were about to give up when I recognized his dead eyes in one of the pictures. The officers asked if I was sure. I confirmed it was him, but that he'd grown a beard since the photo was taken. They thanked me and said they would call if needed. 2 weeks later, the news announced the police had apprehended the man suspected of kidnapping and assaulting young girls in the area. The news story included his mugshot, and it was the same man I identified. He was caught with one of his underage victims in his car. It took years for the gravity of this incident to truly hit me. Had the bus arrived later, had I not been able to twist myself out of his grasp, had he grabbed me while I was walking and didn't see him, so many ways this could have turned out differently. I was so fortunate when others were not. My sister and I were recently talking about things we saw in our house. Growing up, we both independently saw the same things. I don't remember how the conversation began, but my sister mentioned that she used to see shadow people in the house growing up. I said I saw them in mom and dad's bathroom. Especially when I'd go in their room at night. I'd go into my parents' room at night after nightmares and would watch 5+ figures walk from my mom's closet to my dad's closet and around the corner where the bathtub and toilet were out of sight. When my mom would tell me that it was time to return to my own bed, I'd be petrified with fear she'd have to walk me back to bed because I couldn't dare get out of her bed and walk past her bathroom to leave alone. My sister asked me how many I saw in their bathroom. I told her there were definitely more than 5, but I could never get an exact count. They moved past and through each other, and I couldn't keep count any time I watched them. She thinks there was as many as 11 in there. This was weird to me, but I thought maybe she was just playing along with me, so I asked her about the one in the laundry room. The laundry room door entered straight into a hallway that led all the way through the house to the kitchen/living room. The kitchen and living room were in open floor plan, so exiting the hallway there was a kitchen on your left and a couch and TV to your right. If you walked straight ahead from the hallway you'd reach a glass sliding door to the backyard, so there was an uninterrupted walking path from the laundry room through the hall and all the way to the glass door. There was a shadow figure I saw many times growing up. It would start in the laundry room and sprint clear as day down the hallway through the kitchen and living room and disappear near the glass door. You could see each limb clearly swinging like a human's arms and legs would as it sprinted through the house. It moved fast. When I asked my sister if she'd seen the shadow figure in the laundry room, she made a bit of a face and said it doesn't stay in the laundry room. I asked her what she meant, and she described exactly what I used to see a very clear and obvious person-shaped shadow running through the house and disappearing near the glass door I had never told her that I'd seen. This before. There's no way she could describe exactly what I used to see when I lived in that house unless she had been seeing it too, but it absolutely blows my mind that we both saw shadow figures doing the same things in the same places. I had this really uncomfortable experience at a gas station the other day, and I don't know how else to get this off my chest, so here I am unable to sleep at 1 a.m. hoping writing this out will help me feel a little relief. The other day I went to a full-service gas station. Normally I would pump my own, but I was taking a different route this day. At a new station than the usual station I go to, a male attendant came up to my window and did the usual hello, how are you, and whatever else. By the way, I'm female. After I said good, how are you, the attendant replied, good, it's really good to see you, and licked his lips instantly. I was so uncomfortable. He kept putting his hands on my car where the passenger window was rolled down. I asked to fill up my tank and gave my credit card hard. I immediately started texting my husband about this. At first I thought he was just a creep, but I didn't feel unsafe. Instead of walking away and letting my tank fill up, he stood by my window and started asking me all kinds of questions about my car, saying it was nice and what year was it, that kind of thing. I struggle really hard with feeling the need to be polite in these situations, so I answered his questions, but I was on my phone texting my husband and only giving short one-word answers. When spoken to, what I wanted to do was roll up my window, but again I struggled to not feel the need to be polite after I replied with the year my car was. He put his hands where the passenger window was rolled down and stuck his head inside to poke around my car. At this point I completely froze. I've never had someone invade my space like this in this kind of setting before. I texted my husband to call me immediately, which he did. I told him all about where I was, how I was getting gas, which gas station I stumbled upon in town, and whatever else I did it, so this guy would know that now people knew exactly where I was. Once the gas was done filling, he handed me my card. I immediately rolled up the window and then drove off. It's nothing really crazy that happened, but I cannot get his slimy, gross, lip-licking face out of my head. The hairs on the back of my neck stand up every time I think about it. I just know that guy was more than a creep. He was potentially dangerous, and I will actively be avoiding that station forever. I'm a firefighter, and what I found in the last fire creeped me out. There was a notebook that survived the last fire I was called to. I found it in the smoldering remains of the ashes. I'm not sure if I believed the story in it or not, but I thought I would share it just in case it's real. Mama said there be days like this. It's a nice thought, isn't it? It speaks of a concerned parent trying to comfort her child to the harsh realities of the world. The problem is I don't recall my mama ever saying anything like that to me. Even if she had, I don't think in her wildest nightmare she could have imagined a day like that. The day I leaned against the inside of a train tunnel, soaked in sweat and grime, staring at the train tracks that dripped with the blood of my friend. Blood, but that should have been mine. My name is Joe, and I don't think I'm named after anybody. Mama just always called me Joe. There are lots of things that Mama always just did, like beating the tar out of me when I sassed her, beating the tar out of me if I didn't kill anything for supper, beating the tar out of me the day I told her I wanted to learn to read. At this point you wouldn't think I had much tar left in me, but you couldn't tell Mama that she was a big woman, and I think beating me made her feel better about herself. I grew up in a little shack in the middle of nowhere. Mama always called it a cabin, but it was really just 4 walls and a roof, put together with stolen boards and nails from an old barn down the road. Mama always told me that she took good care of me. Of course, she told me that the cabin was a huge house and that learning was bad. I guess in a way it was for her. I wasn't allowed to have picture books or anything like that. I'll teach you everything you need to know, Mama said. That's what I call a half-truth. She taught me everything she needed me to know, like how to cook, clean, cut firewood, and take care of her when she was sick. Anything other than that was on Mama's forbidden list. How does all this lead to a boy watching his friend being horribly dismembered by a speeding train stick? With me for a bit, we'll get there. Mama didn't have a job. We hunted and grew food. Once a month the two of us would drag our small rickety cart to a truck stop on the outskirts of Ulsan, 15 m away. We would set up alongside the road, selling homegrown vegetables during the day. Mama never let me see or talk to any of the people. They ain't no good, she said, and I don't want you taken after him. Mama had a special word for the people who lived in any town. Arrogant, I didn't know what it meant at the time, but found out later that it meant folks who don't see things the same as Mama. At night, we would go shopping and dumpsters. The next day we would head back home with a few dollars in Mama's pockets, and a card full of treasures from Creek was only 2 miles from the cabin, but to reach it you had to walk through a railroad tunnel. Yet another thing that was on Mama's forbidden list: that tunnel took your daddy away from me, I ain't going to let it take you too, she said. The funny thing about curiosity is you can bottle it up, but once it's out there ain't no way of getting it back in. I found an old children's dictionary on one of our trips, you remember, the kind that had pictures beside the words. Well, I started looking at that book, and before you know it the store was out of my bottle. I lost a lot of tar the day Mama caught me with it. We ain't reading, folks, she screamed as she beat me. Nothing in that book is going to put food on the table. But being young, dumb, and well, whatever, I snuck the book away from her and hid it. This was the beginning of my new life. Isn't it funny how when you latch on to something new, the old just doesn't quite cut it anymore? There was a large empty cave where I hid my treasures, the few children's books that I'd snuck home, my dictionary, and a pair of dress shoes that actually fit. I struggled to read the books, relying heavily on the pictures. My favorite was the one that told me about Halloween, Christmas, and Thanksgiving. Halloween was my favorite for it. The thought of getting all that candy just for putting on a costume made me feel excited. I planned my first trick or treat trip very carefully. I told Mama I would be gone most of the day and into the night, picking her favorite berries, which were already picked and hidden in my cave. She knew it was a long, dangerous way to the patch where those berries grew. She wanted to tell me no, but I could see the hunger in her eyes, and it's funny how desire can override concern. Having gotten her blessing, I went to my cave, put on my dress shoes, ragged jeans, and a shirt. I wrapped my supper in a red bandana and hung it at the end of a stick. With my outfit complete, I walked down to the railroad tracks and stared at the tunnel. The sun was just starting to set, bathing it in an eerie red glow. The stones that formed the opening looked like giant bloody teeth just waiting to eat me up. Mama always told me there was evil that lurked in that tunnel. I used to think she was just trying to scare me to keep me out, but that evening things were different. As I stepped into the dark, I felt the wickedness inside me, like I knew I was doing wrong, but I didn't care. I ate my supper as I walked through the tunnel, leaving the bandana nearly empty. When I came out on the other side, the world had been transformed. Everywhere I looked were bright, shining lights and people hurrying this way and that. I stopped and stared at a giant yellow M. The smells that came from inside made my mouth water. Someday I'll be rich enough to eat their Mama wouldn't like that, I argued with myself. I dragged myself away from the side night and started down a street that on any other night would have seemed bizarre beyond description. Yet tonight it was the greatest thing I had ever seen. I smiled from ear to ear as ghosts holding plastic pumpkins floated by. Next was a trio of miniature superheroes arguing over which one had the most candy. I walked up to the first house I saw and knocked on the door. The porch light came on and an old man and flung open the door. What, he snarled. Trick or treat, I said, holding out my bandana. The old man glared at me. Do you see my porch light on? He said. Yes, I said, looking up. The old man looked up too and harped as several more trick-or-treaters were drawn toward the light like brightly colored insects. He quickly turned the light off and they DFT it away. You see that boy, the old man said, pointing toward the other houses. All those idiots with their porch lights on. Yes, I replied, those are the ones you go to for your satanic pagan candy, not understanding the word satanic or pagan. I turned to leave, but the old man held me back. I do have a treat for you though, he said with a wicked grin, since you were kind enough to wake me up. Wait here. The old man disappeared and reappeared quick enough to be a magician. Here you go, he said, holding out a rotten banana. I took it and tears welled up in my eyes. Thank you, I said, hugging him. It was the last thing he expected. He pulled away from me. I rumped and slammed the door in my face. I peeled the banana and ate it as I walked toward the next house, making sure the porch light was on. As I started up the walkway, I finished the banana and tossed the peel in the yard. A large man in his 30s stood on a lighted porch holding a bowl of candy and frowning as I approached. Trick or treat, I said, holding out my bandana. Are you going to throw that away? The man said gruffly. I looked at my bandana, seeing no reason why I should throw it away. No, not the bandana, the man said. The Banana, he pointed to the discarded peel I thrown into his yard. I picked it up and looked at the large man. Trash can, he said, pointing toward the street. I walked out and saw a can sitting beside a street light. I looked at the man and pointed toward the can. He nodded his approval, and I threw the peel in, then walked away. Hey, called the large man, don't you want any candy? I ran back to the porch, looked into the bowl filled with colorful wrappers, and grabbed a handful. Only take two, the man said. It's still early, I need to have some for the other kids. I hesitated and picked the two that had the most interesting wrapper. Didn't your parents ever teach you not to litter? The man asked, not understanding the word litter. I blued by nodding my head. Where are they anyway? The man said. Who? I asked. Your parents. Daddy's gone and Mama's at home. I said. Your mother let you go trick or treating by yourself? The man said with an edge in his voice, sensing that I'd done something wrong. I said I got to go. I then ran across the street and hid behind a tree. Maybe I should just give up and go home. I pulled out one of the pieces of candy, opened it, and took a bite. My mouth exploded with sweetness. I gobbled it, and the next piece right away. I could feel the blood rushing through my body. The sudden burst of energy dragged me to the next house. The lady smiled and complimented my hobo suit, then gave me 3 pieces of candy, which I devoured as soon as I got out of sight. The rest of the evening was more of the same, polite smiles and lots of candy. My bandana never got a chance to fill up. An hour later I headed back out of town, moving a lot slower. My stomach began to feel strange and make sounds I'd never heard it make. I stopped at the train trash can I'd thrown my banana peel into, and suddenly up chucked all the candy I'd eaten. The large man came outside and watched me heaving into the trash. Can you okay? He asked. Yeah, I said, breathing hard. Here, he said, handing me some paper towels. Clean yourself up and follow me. He waited for me to finish and started walking toward the middle of town. I followed him until we came to a building with a large star on the front of it. I hesitated. Come on in, the man said. It's okay. The large man walked inside, closely followed by me. Evening, sheriff, said a man behind a raised counter. Who's your friend? What's your name, boy? The sheriff asked. Joe. Joe? What, just Joe? What's your last name? I don't understand, I said. My mama always called me Joe. Okay, what's your mama's name? Mama, I said, confused. Joe. Mama, the man at the desk said. Really? The sheriff chuckled a bit. Okay, kid, let's get you cleaned up. Follow me. He took me to the back hallway where the cells were. I got nervous right away. Don't worry, kid, I'm just letting you shower and get some clean clothes. After I showered and changed, he brought me back out, took my picture and prints. Let's run them against the National Runway Network, he told the deputy. Sure thing, boss. Nothing came back. Joe, how long have you been living on the street? The sheriff asked. I didn't know what to say, so I didn't say anything. Where does your mother live? He asked once again. I was silent. I think I know exactly what you need to loosen that tongue of yours. Come on. He left the station with me, tagging along, carrying my old clothes. How's your stomach feeling? He asked. A little better, I said. Good, because we're here. It was a large 2-story brick house. I could see from the street lamp that the house was well kept. When the woman answered the door, she seemed familiar. Hello, sheriff, she said cheerfully. Hello, Marcy, I have someone for you to meet. We've already met, she said, smiling. He was dressed like a hobo. Well, I'm not sure it was a costume. I think he's a runaway. She shook her head and made a sad clocking sound. Come on in, she told me. I've got to get going if it's all the same to you. The sheriff said. Sure, sheriff, she replied. You know our door is always open. Thanks, Morse. I'll send the paperwork over for Joe in the morning. Sounds good, thanks, she replied. You take care, kid. He told me you're in good hands here. I'll see you around. Thank you, sir, I said. He laughed. You can call me Ted. He then nodded and walked away. Marcy showed me to my room, apologizing for how small it was. Little did she know it was nearly the same size as the shack I lived in with Mama. I laid down on the soft bed and fell asleep. Instantly, I woke up with a start and panicked, alone in a huge room I didn't recognize, surrounded by comforts I never had at home. I jumped out of bed, threw on my old clothes, and snuck out of the bedroom window. I headed back toward the tunnel with Dawn about an hour away, feeling guilty for leaving Mama to begin with. But Marcy seemed so friendly, and the bed was so soft. By the time I reached the tunnel, my mind was in an all-out war with itself over which place to call home. Lost in thought, I wasn't paying attention to where I was headed, and I had meandered into the tunnel instead of going through it as quickly as I could. I kicked rocks and pondered life. Ray was the closest thing I had to a friend. He lived in a shack 2 hollows up from the one I lived in, he was born with only one working arm. The other one just wasn't there. One tiny finger grew out of his shoulder. It was the weirdest thing I ever saw. Ray didn't talk, either. He only had a stump for a tongue. I never knew if he was born that way or if he said something real bad to his daddy. I never knew how old Ray was. He was full grown when I was still toddling around the shack, but he always had the brain of a child. Sometimes when I would go dumpster shopping, I would bring Ray back an old beat-up action figure that someone had tossed out. He loved playing with them, but the first thing he did with each one was tear off the right arm. I guess he thought it made them more like him. Ray loved the trains. Every time I saw him, it was somewhere near the tracks. Tonight was no exception. The hum grew steadily louder. The air itself seemed charged with electricity. The ground shook, and as I stood frozen by fear and indecision, the deafening scream of the horn jolted me into action. As I ran, the realization washed over me that I was about to die. Horribly, I stumbled blindly into the powerful light, helpless and lost. Suddenly a hand grabbed me, yanked me back from the tracks, and shoved me into the emergency cutout line as the train sped past. The wind from the passing train made me cover my face. Once the train had passed, I looked around to see who my savior was, but there was no one. I slowly stepped out of the cutout and looked around. 10 yards away, sitting in between the tracks, was a colorful piece of plastic. I picked it up. It was a dirty action figure with one of its arms ripped off. Oh my God. Ray! I looked down and saw a small splatter of blood as I followed the tracks to the opening of the tunnel. It had intensified by the time I tasted fresh air. The rails looked like the floor of a slaughterhouse, so that's how I came to be there, watching my friend's blood drip down of the cold steel rails. The noblest self-sacrificing act I had ever witnessed, and I was the only one who knew about it. If that was the end of the story, most of you would just shake your head and move on, but the story was just beginning. I stood at the crossroads in my young life. If I went back home and told Mama what happened, I would lose a lot of tar for going through the tunnel and lying to her. If I just up and left, Mama would come looking for me, and God knows what would happen if she found me. I ran to my cave, threw all of my important things in a ready old backpack, then ran back to the tunnel. Next, I took the basket full of bee, threw them here and there. Anywhere there was blood, then sat in the basket in the middle of the tracks and waited. I just couldn't see in the light. As dawn began to fight off the darkness, Joe came. Mama's voice. I froze. I didn't think she could see me. She was probably just calling out, hoping I was close enough to hear her. My resolve waned every time she called my name. Finally, I saw 2 lights. One was Mama's old hurricane lamp, and the other was an oncoming train. My heart leaped and failed at the same time. The train approached quickly. Its horn nearly deafened me. It drove into the tunnel, destroying the basket as soon as it passed. I ran through. Just as I came out, the lamp appeared at the other end. I slowly peeked around the corner and could barely make out the silhouette of a woman on her knees between the tracks. She was rocking back and forth, holding something in her arms. Finally, I realized it was the remains of the basket. My heart nearly failed me. I wanted to run back to her and tell her it was all right. I took a half step forward, then remembered Ray not wanting his sacrifice to be in vain. I quickly turned my back on the tunnel and started toward the town. 10 minutes later, I climbed back into the open bedroom window, closed it behind me, and turned around to see Marcy standing there with her arms folded. "That strike one," she said firmly. "You never leave this house without asking first." "Sorry," I said, hanging my head. "Well, come on then and get some breakfast." "That's it," I asked. "What else were you expecting?" She questioned. "A beating." "Who beat you?" Marcy asked, her eyes moist with sympathy. "Mama," I said, shrugging my shoulders. She hugged me tightly and whispered, "I will never beat you." She suddenly released me and went downstairs. Dabbing at her eyes, I followed and ate the largest breakfast I'd ever had. It didn't take long for me to start thinking I had picked the right household. The year was full of UPS and downs. Marcy and her kids, Paul and Sharon, not only welcomed me into their house, they took me on as their pet project. I had never heard the phrase foster family before. Within 6 months, I had caught up on years of neglect and was able to go to school with only 1 grade lower than my each bracket. They rallied around me as their cause, and we became a true family like I'd never known. The Lord giveth, and the Lord taketh away. Next Halloween, I went trick-or-treating again. Sharon had just turned 14 and decided that she was too mature for trick-or-treating. Paul and I had dressed up as pirates and went together, but we got separated in a crowd of costumes as I looked for him. I realized how close I was to the tunnel. Hesitantly I went over and peered into it. To my surprise, I saw the silhouette of a woman, kneeling in the middle of the tracks holding a basket as she rocked back and forth. "Mama," I whispered. Somehow the figure hurt me. The silhouette looked up straight at me. Without knowing why, I felt a sudden chill run up my spine. The figure stood and began to walk slowly toward me. I was drawn towards it and started into the tunnel. Instead of being overwhelmed with relief and love, I felt as if I was suffocating. Suddenly, the figure disappeared once again. My curiosity had overwhelmed my common sense. I strained my eyes to see where the figure had gone. I pulled out a small flashlight and shone it around the tunnel. My shadow seemed bigger. I shone the flashlight on it, but it didn't go away. The light just disappeared into it like an empty abyss that even light couldn't escape from. Then I realized that it wasn't my shadow, it was Mama's. As I looked, the air became heavy and hard to breathe. I felt a presence behind me and heard the word Joe whispered in my ear. I panicked and froze. The dark figure came closer. I felt like I was suffocating. An icy tendril touched my face, breaking me out of my stupor. I ran with all my might, but before I knew it, I was back home. I slammed the door and leaned against it, shaking. "It's about time you got home. Paul and I were about to go looking for you," Marcy called from the kitchen. "How was trick-or-treating?" I had to focus to slow my breathing. "Fine," I said, to buy a few precious moments to recover. "Well, I made pumpkin pie, but I'm sure you ate half your candy already," she said. "Yeah, I'm kind of tired. I'm going to go to bed." She smiled, that warm smile that let me know everything would be okay. "Good night, sweetie." A few hours later, I was having a wonderful sugar-free dream about diving into a swimming pool of candy. When my dream went dark, I felt so cold that I tried to snuggle up in my blanket, but it didn't warm me. I opened my eyes to find the room totally black, no lights at all. I looked around to try to get my bearings and saw a shadow beside the bed move on its own. It reached out for me, but I recoiled. "Joe, it whispered." "Mama." I slowly reached toward it. It felt like liquid ice running over my hand. "Home," it said, looking out the window toward the tunnel. I looked where it was pointing. "No, Mama, this is my home now." The shadow drew back as Marcy stumbled into the room, half asleep. "What's wrong, honey? Is it all that sugar?" She stopped dead when she saw the shadow hovering over me. "This is my new Mama," I said. "She treated me good, taught me to read, and she never once beat me." The shadows seemed to consider this. "Joe," Marcy whispered to me without taking her eyes off the shadow. "I'll explain later," I whispered back. The shadow whispered. Blood-black tendrils shot into Marcy's ears. She screamed, but was silenced when the shadow filled her mouth and eyes from the inside, making her look like a living skull. I have no idea the kind of hell she was going through on the inside, but outside her body was flailing around uncontrollably. Blood flew as she smashed herself against the walls, as though looking for an escape that she could never find. "Stop it, Mama," I screamed, but dared not to make a move for fear of being pummeled by Marcy. Finally, the tendrils came out of Marcy's ears and she collapsed in a bloody heap. Paul and Sharon wandered into the room, rubbing their eyes. "What's all the commotion?" Sharon was cut short by the sight of the blood, and her mother face down on the floor. "Mom," she and Paul yelled, running towards her as the shadow reached for them. "No, Mama." I dove toward the shadow, trying to tackle it or to stop it somehow, but my body passed right through it. Felt as if my very soul was frozen. I crashed to the floor on the other side, knocking over most of my possessions. I watched in horror as the tendrils penetrated their ears. Love, terror, and betrayal on their faces are something I've never forgotten. As the shadow turned them into bloody, struggling puppets as well, they slumped to the floor of my destroyed bedroom. As I lost consciousness, I woke to a strange combination of hot and cold. The shadow brushing my cheek gave me shivers while flames licked the walls of my room. I looked around and saw my portable heater laying face down, still running. Its red-hot coils had caught the carpet on fire, and the flames had spread like the flu in elementary school. The fire surrounded me. I glanced over at the mangled bodies that hadn't moved. I panicked and jumped through the window as the flames converged, landing on the grass in the cool night air. I then turned back to watch the fire devour what was my home and family. "Home," the shadow whispered in my ear. "No, Mama, you destroyed my home." "Home," it hissed while tendrils hovered next to my ears. "Go ahead, I would rather die than go Back with you, it hovered there as the mournful wall of fire trucks sounded in. The distance I reached out to the shadow, let me live my life mama when it's done. I swear I'll come home, the tendril encompassed my hand as I fought the urge to pull away just when I thought I would get frostbite. The shadow evaporated, I collapsed onto the wet grass and stared at the flames as they climbed high into the night sky. The smell of plastic and wood burning made me feel like my own flesh was burning off of my bones, leaving me dead. Inside, the mournful wail ended as the fire trucks pulled up and bathed the neighborhood in flashing red light. One of the firemen guarded me away from the house, sat me on a curb, and threw a blanket over my shoulders. Slowly, they got control of the fire. The angry orange flames were quenched like my hopes and dreams of a normal life. I watched as 3 Gans, each holding a body, were wheeled out of what was left of the house. They each bypassed the ambulance and went straight to the coroner's van. I sat silently staring at the ground. Joe, Ted said my eyes didn't move, didn't blink. Questions flew from everywhere. The EMT, the sheriff, the judge, the jury. I didn't dare tell any of them the truth. After the trial, Ted drove me to my new home. We pulled up to a huge brick building surrounded by fences covered in razor wire. The sign in front said Sun Mental Institute. The gate opened and he drove inside. After he parked, he slumped forward against the steering wheel for a moment, then let out a long sigh. Look, kid, if you do get better, I'll bring you back, I promise. 4 orderlies came out and took me inside. I'd like to say that my time at the Institute was helpful and productive. I'd like to say that I learned a lot and came out a better person. I'd like to say that Ted was as good as his word and came to get me when my time was up. A wise man once said, 2 out of 3 ain't bad. I've written more journals about other things that have happened to me in my life, but there's still a little more left to this story. 50 years later, Grandpa, did that story really happen? Emily said, looking up into my face. Of course it did, I said. Are you calling your grandpa a liar? No, sir, she said. But whatever happened to that boy? He got better, grew up, got married, and had a wonderful family, I said, smiling. Okay, honey, Joe Junner said, it's getting late, we better get going. Emily hugged at me and got down off of my lap. Look at me, Grandpa, I'm a princess, she said, twirling in a circle, and a beautiful princess too. I said, I hope you get lots of candy this year. Here's some to get you started. I then put a handful of candy in the little plastic pumpkin she was carrying. She smiled and kissed me on the cheek, then skipped to the car. Well, we're going to get going, Joe Junner said. Lots of trick or treating to do. I can't believe she's in 2nd grade already. Where does the time go? Joe Junner said, looking at his watch. Where indeed, I said, looking at Joe Junner. Are you sure you won't come live with us? Mom's been gone for over a year now. You know I can't do that. I made a promise, I replied. Please, Dad, not this again, Joe Junner said, putting his face in his hands. I thought they cured you of this at the Institute. Aren't you taking your meds? I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Son, they can't cure my problem with medication. I pulled out a pocket knife and started to whittle. Joe Junner just bowed his head in resignation. Okay, love you, Dad, love you too, son. Emily waved as they drove their new SUV over the dirt road that crossed the tracks and started the long winding trip toward town. I watched them go as I whittled absently. The red, orange, and yellow leaves had given way to the dull browns. Soon winter would rear its ugly head. I smiled as I looked at the empty wood pile with a complete lack of concern. My jaw clenched as the air around me grew heavy. A shadow appeared in the chair. I continued to whittle, trying my best to appear as if the presence didn't disturb me. The shadow reached its hand over and gently laid it on top of mine. Home, it whispered. Yes, Mama, I'm home. I smiled, ignored the chills that shot up my arm, sat down the piece of wood I'd been carving into a train engine, picked up my pipe, packed it with tobacco, and lit it. I took a long draw on it and watched the match continued to burn. The flame seemed to mesmerize me, as if staring at a microcosm of my entire life in that tiny glowing chemical reaction. I barely ever smoked, but today was different. Today was a special day. As the flame burned down to my fingers, I dropped the match on top of the pile of whittlewood shavings, then got up and went inside. The recommended dosage for my sleeping pills was 2 as needed. I took 2 dozen and swallowed them with a glass of water. As I write these last words that I will ever write, I just wanted to say a few goodbyes to thank you for sacrificing your life to save mine. To Ted, thank you for giving me a new one. And to Mama, burn in hell just like I will. I laid down on the old worn sea and Looked around the cabin one last time night, mama, I mumbled to the shadow. The shadow caressed my face, causing me to shiver. I laid my notebook down, set it in a bucket, and placed a blanket on top of it, for crew worked through the night to control the blaze before it became a full-blown forest fire once it was out. They investigated the cause. They found the remains of the cabin, and the remains of Joe. The fire had started on the front porch beside what was left of a wooden chair. There wasn't much left to identify, except a notebook that had been covered up in a bucket, the very notebook I'm reading this story from. As they searched, they also found 2 graves. One was freshly dug and empty. The markers were badly burned, but still legible. The first one said Mama, and the second marker said Joe, followed by a short passage. It read, "Death, where is thy sting?" My brother didn't leave his room for 3 days. My parents would not let me check on him. On the 3rd night, Jacob didn't come out of his room. I got the courage to bring it up to Mom. "People don't sleep for this long," I said. She was cooking a casserole. The 6th one this week. We were running out of fridge space for the leftovers, but she kept making more. I would watch her from the corner of the kitchen, her posture curved and her newly grayed hair hanging over the food. I walked over and tugged at her sleeve, but she didn't respond. She was slathering butter on the top crust. "Mom," I said, "did you hear me? He needs his strength." She said, "We can't be bothering him." Before I could say anything, my dad walked in. His eyes were red and swollen, but he was smiling. He had 3 cans of Coke in his hands. "I'm starving," he said. I still have the taste of that horrible cafeteria food in my mouth. You would think hospitals had good food for how much money they make. My mom said, "I know, right?" Dad said. He placed the drinks on the counter. My mom didn't want us to go near Jacob's room, but I was getting worried. I peered out from the kitchen. His room hung at the end of the hallway, like an abandoned lighthouse, the only sign of life being the New York Yankees poster taped to his door. Near the ground, there was a small sliver of space to see. If he had turned on his lights, it was dark, as it had been for the last 3 days. I turned back to my mom. "Shouldn't we check on him?" I asked. "I don't know why. Places like Wendy or Burger King don't put up little shops in hospitals," Dad went on. "I mean, you have hundreds of people who are stuck there for days on end. That's consistent business. It's all politics." My mom said, "They sign these contracts that are impossible to break." Right, that makes sense, right?" My dad replied. He was standing next to my mom, now his face inches from the zero. He took a long sniff. He said, "Smells great. Do you want some of the leftovers while this finishes in the oven?" My mom asked. "I think we still have some from yesterday. Wasn't the spinach and Ricard one good?" "Very good, very, very good," my dad said. I couldn't stop eating it. "Jacob's going to devour these when he gets the appetite," my mom said. I turned back and took a step into the hallway. The distance between Jacob's room and I felt long and narrow, kind of like a high wire. When I got away from the casserole smell, I hit a different smell. It reminded me of old gym socks. Even with my mom's array of candles and incense, I still smelled it. It cut through everything. The last time I saw Jacob, I was on the drive home from his treatment. His face was pale green, and his eyes were rolling back. My mom said I had to keep talking to him to keep his focus. I told him about my friends from school and how they keep pranking the teacher by putting tacks on her chair. It wasn't true. I saw it on a TV show once, but I was running out of material to talk about. It didn't matter, though. Jacob didn't even respond. All he did was cough. Pink drool was spilling onto his t-shirt. "Danny," my mom said, "why don't you heat up some of those leftovers? We're all craving that spinach and ricotta casserole. I can't stop thinking about it." My dad said I was dreaming about it last night. I ignored them. I kept my focus on my brother's door. I didn't dream about the casserole like Dad. I kept having a different dream. My brother was running into my room and flicking my ear. It was a game that we used to play. We would tiptoe to the other store, then wait for our moment. Then the attacker ran in and got one of 2 good flicks before retreating. In my dream, though, Jacob would run in and flick me, but I wouldn't move. I just stood there. He would flick and laugh, then flick some more. Sometimes he would flick so hard my ear would fly off. "Earth to Danny," my dad said, snapping his fingers in my face. He was standing in front of me, blocking my view of Jacob's door. "Do you mind heating up 4 portions of the casserole in case Jacob wants some? We're going to eat that before this next casserole because we want to make sure Jacob's able to try it, because in my opinion it was definitely one of your mother's best." I looked up at him and held my eye contact. I couldn't say what I was thinking, so I wanted my dad to feel it. Maybe if I stared long Enough my feelings would translate, but my dad looked at me for only a moment. Then he broke contact in that brief connection, though I saw something I didn't want to see. It was like staring down the tunnel of the world's deepest. "Well, come on now," my dad said. He grabbed my shoulders and turned me around. His voice got heavier. "You're going to want to heat up each piece individually, because if you do them all at once and you won't get even heat through the pieces, and you'll probably have a couple of them that are too hot and others too cold, and then Jacob won't get the full picture of how good these casseroles are." My dad let go of my shoulders and walked ahead of me, but I stayed in the hallway. A moment longer. I turned to look at my brother's door one last time. I fantasized about walking up to it and going inside, but I was afraid my mom would yell at me. Besides, I never liked going in there. He had a puke bucket next to his bed, which always had pink splatters in it, and there were always clumps of hair on his pillows back before the last hospital visit. My mom would make me go in there and talk to him, but I always made up some excuses, like I had a cold and didn't want him to get sick. When I couldn't get out of it, I would stay in there for a few minutes and watch Try to Breathe. I would tell him about some TV episode one saw, then run back to my room. I looked up. I thought I was walking back to the kitchen, but I was moving toward the door. I didn't want to, but I kept moving. It was like my limbs were controlled by a puppeteer. I put my hand on the doorknob. I turned. The GY sock smell filled my head like helium. Through the darkness I could make out a SLI of my brother's face. The soft evening light fell on him. His eyes were open, staring at the ceiling. His arms were straight as rulers, and his fingers curled like a blooming rose. I walked to the side of his bed. Red spit fell off of his lips. He looked like a frowning clown. I flicked his ear. It was hard. I walked out and closed the door behind me. As I walked back, I seemed to forget what the inside of his room looked like. With the door closed, it could be anything. Jacob could be doing jumping jacks, or reading comic books, or plotting his next earlick attack. When I walked into the kitchen, I heated up 4 plates of spinach and ricotta casserole. When they were done, I wrapped Jacob's plate in aluminum foil and put them in the oven to keep warm. Then Mom, Dad, and I sat in the dining room and ate in silence. In college, 2008 to 2014, I was an avid metal detectorist. I knew of an old military trail and river crossing way back in a secluded portion of the woods that I knew not many others were aware of. I finally decided one winter morning that I was going to go and metal detected. Finally, the trail is about a mile or two from a city park along the South Concho River in San Angelo, Texas. I parked my truck, got all my gear, which included a serrated knife for digging, and I began my trek through the raw woods and brush for the trail. About halfway into the trees, I get into a clearing and find a tent in campsite that's about 40 yards back from the river and very isolated. There's cans laying all around it, some clothes and other stuff that made it evident that someone was using it. I didn't hang around it for long and kept on my way. As I was getting past the tent, this haggard-looking guy comes out of the brush just a few feet from me. I startled him as much as he startled me, and after some innocent chit-chat back and forth, he asked what I was doing in the woods. I told him about the old trail, my metal detecting stuff, and like that. It was a pretty well-known site for hobbyists like me. The latter seemed to get him a bit anxious. He starts asking me if I've messed with his campsite any, and I told him no, except for accidentally stepping on one of his cans. He was mostly concerned if I had looked into the tent itself, though, which truthfully I hadn't. The guy related that his wife had kicked him out of their apartment a few days ago, and he was just staying in the woods until he got back on his feet. It didn't really add up in my mind, but I didn't ask anything else about it. Finally, I told him that I was going to get on my way, and with a weird look on his face, he suggested that I not go behind his campsite because he'd recently used the bathroom back there. Whether there was fresh fertilizer back there or not, there was no way I was going to be hanging around much longer. Regardless, I went a bit further towards the trail I wanted to metal detect, but never felt quite comfortable, so I made a quick turn towards the river and headed back to my truck fairly rapidly. I never saw the guy again until about 2 years later. His picture was in the local news for being apprehended by authorities for the murder of his wife. He killed her and then buried her in the exact area of woods where I encountered him on that day, apparently, even though I can't recall if it was the very day of the crime or not. He had just completed the matter when we met. So my house has, for as long as I can remember, major levels of paranormal Activity, it's an old farmhouse that's been passed through about 4 generations of my family, and there have been plenty of deaths on the property. It was built around 1880, and while it's not got a particularly bloody past, it's got stories. My grandma died in what would later become my nursery. My great-grandfather fell out of the Hallet back in the 1920s. They found an old unmarked grave left from the Civil War that got left behind in the 70s, and whatever else activity is as common as a house fly around here. Cabinets and doors open and shut, things get moved, footsteps in the hall when no one else is home, figures in doorways. We hear a voice in the old grain silos sometimes, which isn't possible because if someone was in there they'd suffocate. None of it feels or acts malicious, so we're used to it. We just sort of take it on the chin. We're so used to it, in fact, that I completely ignored someone trying to break into my back door last night because I just thought it was the normal activity. I was in my brother's room, fiddling with his PC for some stuff, and I heard weird knocking sounds from outside the house. Knocking is normal, though it's usually inside, but I went ahead and ignored it. This went on for about 3 or 4 minutes before my dog started growling so loudly that I could hear him from across the house. He doesn't growl at anything besides the basement door, so I thought it was weird and went to go calm him. Down in the living room, I heard the back door in the kitchen shaking and yelled, "Stop it, you're going to break the handle," because that's just the sort of thing we say when something is getting particularly rough. Maybe 30 seconds later, I heard the door swing open and without really thinking about it, yelled, "I'm pretty sure I told you to knock it off." I didn't realize anything was wrong until a voice I didn't recognize said really loud, and the door slammed shut. Of course, I immediately ran to see what it was, just in time to see a silver truck peeling out of my driveway. So yeah, essentially just a warning not to get too comfortable with your haunted housemates, because it might turn out it's not them making the noise. I'm a 14-year-old male, and my friend group all around the same age, all love one thing, sailing. So in the event of a boat race in a lake in Italy, where we all come from, we decided to participate since the race was hosted on a lake. There was a lot of green and camps nearby. My friend suggested we spend the nights there camping. We brought our tents and sleeping mats, and we found a perfect spot. It was kind of isolated, but it had a beautiful view of the lake. One small issue, though: the camp was more like an open space in a little forest, so we were surrounded by trees, with the only way to get in and out being a narrow dirt road. We parked the camper there, and US teens prepared for the sleep outside while the adults slept in the camper. We had a ton of fun joking, starting a fire, all the things you do on a camping trip. When it was time to sleep, we all got into our tents and drifted off into sleep. Well, I hope so for my friends, but that wasn't the case for me. I just couldn't sleep, probably due to the uncountable number of sodas I downed just a few hours prior. As I stared at the roof of the tent, I started to have the feeling that we weren't alone there, that there was something, or even worse, someone there with us. I didn't think much of it and tried to sleep until I heard the loud sound of a tree branch breaking. I wasn't the only one to hear it. My friend, who was in the tent with me, suddenly woke up and whispered what was that. I told him that it was probably an animal wandering around and accidentally broke a tree branch on the ground, as it probably would often occur in forests like that. As I kept explaining, my friend signaled to me to be quiet and to listen. There were footsteps. That's what ran through my mind as soon as I heard leaves and branches moving on the ground. What happened next, though, is scary. Everyone was suddenly woken up by the camper's anti-theft alarm going off. We all peeked out of our tents just to see a silhouette of a man running away in the woods. We found a crowbar near the camper's front right door. Thankfully, the alarm went off and scared the thief, because if it didn't happen, most likely all of our belongings that were inside the camper would have been stolen. As I was reading some of the stories in this community, I remembered this night from about 8 years ago. It was after 11 p.m. and I was taking my dogs out for the last toilet walk before bed. At the time, I was living in a rural area, houses farther apart, lots of wooded lots around with wild pigs often crossing our path. I would often take long walks, because one of the dogs had a problem with having accidents in the morning if he hadn't had an adequate walk to do all of his business. It was dark, so I had a flashlight, and I wasn't expecting to meet anyone in the middle of nowhere so late at night, but there appeared on the opposite side of the road ahead another flashlight. We had a few neighbors, but of the homes around, I knew almost all of them from the years, on rare occasions Someone else may be walking a dog, but I could count the instances on my fingers as I passed the other flashlight. In the night, a tall, thin, pale man who I've never seen before crossed the street to my side and began to follow behind me. He yelled out, "Hey, I like your dogs, can I pet them?" I stayed calm, walking briskly, ignoring him. My house was close, and I was almost home. He continued to follow, yelling, "Hey, what's your name? I just want to pat your dogs." He had a thick European Slavic accent. I ignored him and ran up into my house, through the door, locked it, and ran to my bedroom. I told my husband that there was a strange man who followed me home and that I was really disturbed that he knows where I live. My brave husband immediately ran out of the house, I guess maybe to find this guy. I was on pins and needles waiting for him to come back. He came back home with his steel baseball bat in hand. He said he caught up to him and asked him who the hell he was and why he was following a woman around at basically midnight, being a creep. The guy said he was new to town and he was walking around hoping to meet and make some new friends. Basically, his story was bizarre and it didn't really make sense. My husband told him if he ever sees him again near our home, he'd break his knees with that baseball bat, and I never saw him again until 2 years later. That is, in a neighboring city. I was out with a girlfriend looking at art in a museum when I turned the corner, and it was him. I would never forget his face. He looked straight at me, and I can't remember exactly what he said, but he knew who I was from that night. He said something like, "Oh, you're the girl from that night with the dogs." I don't remember because I was in disbelief. Again, he had that thick European accent. He looked, as I remembered him, tall, skinny and pale. I grabbed my friend's arm and quickly walked in the opposite direction. She asked me, "Do you know that creepy guy?" And I told her the story as we left the museum. I haven't seen him since. What are the odds of this all being a coincidence? Late April of 2022, a few friends and I went on a road trip through southern Illinois. We passed to Shaw National Forest and stopped at the Trig Observation Tower. After soaking in the beautiful view and smoking a few joints with a random stoner couple we met on the way up, we parted ways with our smoke buddies and headed out toward our campsite for the night. It was getting late and we were driving down these back roads as the sun was setting. It was pretty isolated, incredibly thick woods flanked both sides of the road and not another car in sight. That's when we saw a light up ahead, just barely visible through some thick brush. We slowed down, thinking it was some campers getting set up for the night or some hikers who got lost before sundown. As we approached, something seemed off. The light emanated from this old camper van, and the thing hadn't moved in months. Vines were slowly creeping over the canopy. The whole setup just screamed abandoned. We looked back to have a second look, trying to make out whether it was from a fire or something inside the van. At first glance, we didn't see anyone as we surveyed the area, but there he was, feet away from the camper, half hiding behind a tree. He was shirtless, only in his coverall pants and hiking boots. He was staring at us and didn't reply when we shouted a hello as he began to walk in our direction with one hand hidden behind his back as if he were holding something. We called out again to see if he needed assistance or knew where the campsite was, but he just kept coming, silent and expressionless. We didn't wait to see what he was up to. We leaped right back into the car and flew out of there, dust and rocks kicking up as we took off down the road. We were pretty shaken up by the time we finally pulled into our campsite. Worse was yet to come. We had left the firewood at the gas station, and with the rain, everything around us was pretty wet. We ended up hanging up our hammocks and attempted to fall asleep without a fire, which wasn't great for our nerves either. No sooner had we all sigh and started to relax, we then heard footsteps coming up from over the crest of a hill, slow and deliberate, just like the guy we'd seen earlier. We killed our lights and sat there in the dark, listening. It felt like eons before the steps stopped, and we finally worked up the courage to look around. We took our flashlights and knives just in case, and we did a quick scan, but we saw nothing. By then we said it, so we started packing up our gear, figuring we just sleep in the car. Then from behind us there was a cough, and that was all we needed to pack up in a hurry and race down the cluttered trail to our car. We didn't even worry about packing neatly. We just tossed all of our in the back and got out of there. The next hour was a blur of dark, twisty little roads with no cell service and not a hint of where we were going. Finally, we hit a paved road, and after about 20 more minutes and running on fumes, we come upon a little country store with a gas pump connected to an Adorable house and AO auto garage. It had already closed for the night, but the family living there saw us at the pump while they were having dinner and they came outside to help. They even opened the store so we could buy some snacks and pop after what we experienced. Talking to them was really a huge relief and it let us calm our nerves. We eventually got back on the road and kept driving 6 hours straight back home. When we first moved into our new home, everything seemed perfect. It was an old Victorian house, the kind you'd see on a postcard, charmingly eerie but still inviting. My husband and I were excited to raise our 5-year-old daughter Emily in a place with so much character and history. The first few weeks were blissful. Emily loved her new room, especially the built-in bookshelf filled with dusty old books left by the previous owners. Everything was fine until one night Emily came into our room at around 3 a.m. clutching her stuffed rabbit. "Mommy," she whispered, tugging on my sleeve. "There's a man in my walls." At first I thought she'd had a bad dream, so I comforted her and told her there were no such things as men in the walls. I walked her back to her bed and I stayed with her until she fell asleep. But this didn't happen just once. Over the next few nights, Emily kept waking us up at odd hours saying the same thing: "The man in the walls won't stop talking." My husband and I were concerned, but we chalked it up to an overactive imagination. We assured her that everything was okay, but her stories became more detailed and disturbing. "He's tall with a long coat," she said one morning over breakfast. "He whispers secrets to me, but they're not nice secrets." The more she talked about it, the more unnerved I became. I started to notice little things around the house. 2 objects would go missing, only 2 reappear in strange places. The floors creaked when no one was walking on them, and sometimes there was a faint tapping sound coming from inside the walls. One night while reading in bed, I heard it, the unmistakable sound of someone shuffling inside the wall behind our bedroom. It was faint but distinct. My heart raced, but I told myself it was just the house settling. However, the noise grew louder, almost as if someone was dragging something heavy. I nudged my husband awake, and we both listened. Frozen, the shuffling stopped abruptly, followed by 3 loud knocks, deliberate, almost like a signal. My husband grabbed a flashlight, and we cautiously went to Emily's room. She was fast asleep, her rabbit clutched tightly in her arms. Suddenly the tapping started again, this time louder and more frantic. It was coming from behind her bed. My husband immediately went to the basement to check the old pipes while I stayed with Emily. As I sat there, the air grew colder, and I could swear I heard a faint whispering coming from the wall, just like Emily had described. After a few minutes, my husband returned, pale as a sheet. "There's something down there," he whispered. I found a small door behind the furnace. "It's locked from the outside." We didn't sleep that night. The next morning we called a locksmith to open the door. When he finally pried it open, the stench hit us first. It was a foul, rotting smell inside. We found a tiny hidden room. The walls were covered in scratch marks, and there was a single tattered coat hanging on a rusty nail. But what terrified me the most was the old yellowed newspaper clipping taped to the wall. The headline read, "Local man goes missing after suspected murder spree, believed to be hiding in walls." We moved out that day. To this day, Emily still asks about the man in the walls. She says he's lonely and wants to be found. I shudder every time, wondering what or who was really whispering to her. I work at a big retail store as a self-checkout host. Most of my days are spent walking laps and listening to customers saying things like, "I don't work here," or "Why aren't you on the register?" I understood their frustrations. Usually there would be 2 or 3 of us at the self-checkout and maybe 2 registers open. We got a new guy in. His name was Terry. Terry always wore a mask as it was 2021, and the pandemic was still pandemic. I was training him, telling him to stock candy and bags. He would ask questions anyone would ask: if I was in school, if I had a girlfriend. I lived in a small city/big town that had a good college. Students from all over the country would come and usually wound up with the prisons or retail. I usually asked them the same questions. I told him no on both accounts. He then asked if I ever went hunting. We had a lot of woods in big forests around the town. "No, I don't like guns," I said. He said he'd have to take me one day. A few days go by and he's over on my site again. He asks if I have family in town, and if they didn't do they live close. I lived 3 doors down from my mom. He starts talking about hunting again, how he was out with his buddies and started using pack tactics where they would box in the prey and finish off weird for deer, seeing as they flee at the first Thought of a noise, he's off for a few days because new hires have problems getting hours. For the first 3 weeks I talked to one of my coworkers and they tell me he asks a lot about me the next time I see him. His questions are very telling. How tall would you say you bear? How much do you weigh? How well do you know the woods past so and so street? I a big guy at 6'2" and 300 pounds, and when he brought up hunting again, a creepy thought sent a chill down my spine. Come on man, you'd like it just some good old boys shooting the late at night in the middle of the woods. Then the real fun starts right before dawn. They won't know what hit them. The mask hit most of his face, but I could see it when he smiled. I don't know why he thought that would be a great way to convince someone. Other than feeling like they were about to hunt me, it sounded like I would have been bored as before. I must have made a face or something because he turned and walked away quick. I told a couple of coworkers about it, but that was his last day. I haven't seen him again, and I hope that we never meet. Music. Again, growing up, my parents were the stereotypical overprotective immigrant parents, but after this encounter I understand why. I'm the youngest of 3. And I have an autistic and mentally disabled older brother. We are fairly close to the same age, so we did pretty much everything together when we were children. That made it a lot easier for my parents. I always took care of my brothers in general, but I always kept an extra cautious eye on my autistic brother. My mom is the strong but always nervous type, always trying to think ahead, trying to do the right thing, trying to protect her own. An incredible mama bear who never tires. She taught me to never trust strangers. Don't get in someone's car if you don't know them. Never follow someone you've never met before who tells you that your mom and her dad has sent them to pick you up. She would always have a meeting with our school to allow me to travel by bus with my brother. That was because we lived close to the school. The government rarely let me take the yellow school bus, but my brother was allowed this state-funded privilege in the end. Even if I didn't have permission, the bus drivers were so nice they'd let me tag along with him anyway. So with that said, in primary school we would always take the yellow school bus to go to and back from school. One day, as usual, the bus dropped us off at the end of our street and we had to walk to our apartment. Usually my mom would open the door for us, even if my oldest brother was home. She never let us answer the door when we were kids for obvious reasons. That day, however, my parents weren't home. We were ringing and knocking, but we never had any answer. A car eventually pulled over in front of the building. Luckily, we had a relatively long walkway that separated the sidewalk from the stairs, so they couldn't get to us easily. Suddenly, a woman came out halfway from the passenger seat and waved at us, probably to signal us to approach. While she was gesturing, the rear door opened. That's when I realized she wasn't alone. I couldn't correctly identify who that person was since her overall shape wasn't familiar and the car was a bit far from where we were standing, so I went down a few steps to slightly approach, but I just couldn't recognize her face. I felt really uneasy, so I took my brother's hand and we started running. Pure instinct. I imagined the voice of my mom in the back of my head reprimanding me if I took the risk to approach those strangers. It was winter and we stumbled on ice, but we were quick to get up and keep on running. I'm actually not even sure if my brother understood the whole situation. He is a smart cookie even with all of his difficulties, so I always wondered. Mind you, we weren't even 11 and 12 years old at the time. Yes, the car chased after us, but they weren't able to catch up. We arrived fairly quickly to the neighbor's house. The car sped off when my neighbor opened the door, which made the situation even more well accurate with what I thought it was. It clearly was a kidnapping attempt. When my mom was made aware of the situation, she almost had a heart attack, feeling like she could have lost us. She spent days afterward calling everyone she knew to ask if the strangers were in fact just family or friends. No one came that day, and even so, they'd always called to be sure we were home before passing by. Actually, everyone was dumbfounded, but the story doesn't end there. A few weeks before this incident, we were getting a bunch of phone calls with no one at the other end. It would ring at 2 to 3 o'clock in the morning, 6 o'clock in the morning, or in the middle of the afternoon. It happened so frequently, but being a child, I never felt any red flags from these phone calls. At most, I found them annoying. A few months ago, I put all the pieces together. My mother was especially protective and always on alert mode, probably because she knew that someone was trying to see if we were home alone when they called. I think those people were watching us for a while before trying to take action. I don't think we just happened to be alone. When they were passing by, I don't think the phone calls and the right timing is a coincidence. Shortly after the phone calls stopped, we moved out of that apartment a few months later, and we never had anything like this happen to us since growing up. I always wondered what would have happened if the bus drivers weren't nice enough to let me ride with my brother. Would he have gotten into their car? I'm actually grateful I was with him that day. I can't imagine what would have happened if he was alone and targeted by those monsters. I found the courage to post this after reading the numerous sightings of North American Indian mythical creatures, specifically the short people that seem to go by many names across the tribal regions of America. This exact type of creature has been sighted and discussed among Aboriginal people in Australia for thousands of years. In the southwest region, they're known as the Waji, or hairy bushmen, standing a few feet tall. They possessed insane strength and speed. Prior to colonization, there were stories of their friendship alliance with Aboriginal people, but also there were stories of conflict and people or even children being taken by them. There were specific rules original adults told their children, such as avoiding water bodies at night and the evening, and no matter what, never ever whistle in the dark. It invites the Wajis, and it only spells trouble, although even some Aboriginal people say these stories are just to warn kids about water safety. Well, in 1998, I knew none of this, because I'm not Aboriginal, and at the age of 10 when this all happened, I had never met an Aboriginal person or been taught anything about Aboriginal culture. In school, it was the 90s, and Australia had an uncomfortable relationship with the truth and colonization. Every school holiday, I used to leave the city and visit my aunt in the picturesque southwest countryside. I needed no encouragement in going because I loved the outdoors, and I had free rein to run amok on the dirt bike and even go fishing alongside the magnificent Blackwood River whenever I felt like it, and I went a lot. It was the nines in Australia, and incredibly safe for a 10-year-old kid to roam the landscape for miles and hours on end all alone. With nothing but a trusty pocket knife, I was able to walk through my aunt's massive property to the edge of the forest and then into the depths where the river flowed through, fishing from trout and red finnan. On the last evening before I was due to go back home to the city, I was down there fishing alone. As the sun was setting, I knew I'd get into trouble for being out that late, but having already snared a few trout, I figured I'd be quickly forgiven. Plus, I was still getting bites. I remember having caught the fish and kept them in an old metal bucket. I was on my last few pieces of bait when I recall hearing a tiny pinging noise on the side of the bucket. At first I thought nothing of it, because large gum nuts often fell from the trees, but then it happened again, much louder and more forceful this time. I remember checking the bucket and realized they were small rocks and not gum nuts at all. I looked around, assuming it was some kids from a neighboring property, which was very unlikely, as it was maybe a 30-minute walk to the next property the other side of the river, backed onto the national park where there were no other farms for miles. Plus, I hadn't come across any kids throughout my entire stay at the farm. This is where it got pretty scary. The rocks got bigger and they started flying in from different directions, cutting my cheek and hitting me in the head. At this stage, I started crying. I was only 10 after all, and I dropped the fishing rod. I had 3 large trout in the bucket, and my intention was to pick it up and run back to the farm as quick as I could. As I bent to pick it up, I was hit by another rock in the side of the head, and I fell over. I pulled myself up, and I stared over to the other side of the river, which was the main source of the rocks. What I saw paralyzed my whole body with fear. It was nearly dark at this stage, but I saw the outline of 3 shortle-looking bodies covered in hair. I would have put them at maybe a meter tall. They were the size of small children, but with the bodies of men. Their faces looked like they were part ape, part human. It was their eyes, though. Even though it was getting dark, their eyes had this piercing yellow glow. But they were completely black in the middle. They wore no clothes, but were covered in extremely thick, clumpy hair all over their bodies except from the knees down. And they had arms that hung almost like cavemen. But here's the strangest thing. They stared at me almost without moving, like a literal statues. They had curious expressions fixed on their faces, and they made absolutely no noise whatsoever. It made no sense, as only a few moments before rocks were pelting in from all directions, and yet now they appeared frozen except for their eyes, which followed me. I managed to pull myself up and ran faster than all hell. My aunt was standing on the balcony, and watched me tear through the long grass as quick as I could with blood and cuts on my face. I told her everything, and she called the police. One officer came by to get a statement, and he said he'd visit some of the other farms around town, but he was certain there weren't any other families in the area. My aunt just assumed I couldn't see the figures properly due to the lack of light, and maybe even suffering a concussion from the rocks that hit my head. She assumed they were kids or teens. I know what I saw though, and I'll never forget those murder-looking yellow eyes. The next morning I went with my aunt to collect my fishing rod and bucket. My aunt was shocked to see that the fishing rod and bucket was still there. She thought it was an opportunistic crime. We checked the bucket, and what we saw made our skin crawl. 3 perfect trout skeletons were floating in the bucket, not one morsel left. We don't have bears and wolves in Australia, and even the odingo or fox wouldn't devour an entire fish and leave its skeleton there, especially without the bucket being tipped over. The whole ordeal was terrifying, but as things tend to happen when you're a kid, you just forget about it, or it lives somewhere in the back of your mind rent-free for a while. The police officer found nothing of note, and as nothing was stolen, there was no need for further inquiry. It was the talk of the country pub for a few weeks. Though my aunt was a local, the town had experienced odd things throughout the years, such as the sighting of tiger-like animals in the deep forest and other strange noises. Happenings reported by lumberjacks in the deep forest. It wasn't until I got into my 20s and became a social worker that I started working with Aboriginal communities in town during celebratory events. I came to learn of the different Dreamtime creation stories, and eventually I had the confidence to tell an elder about what I went through. He recognized it as the Wodji strayed away. He said I was lucky to leave that forest alive. He seemed to think that they must have believed I was an Aboriginal boy. I do have a mixed background, and the protocol would have been for me to leave a couple of fish outside the bucket, skew it on sticks for them to come and collect after as payment for fishing in the river, but as I didn't, they reminded me first a few pelts, and when I still didn't, they eventually attacked. There aren't any Aboriginal families in that part of the Southwest, pretty much Caucasian only to this day, which may explain why it only happened to me. The elder believed they could have taken me, though, for disobeying their sacred customs. That part wakes me up in a cold sweat in the middle of the night, because I believe they could have. It's not a story I tell to my family and friends, but will confide in with the odd Aboriginal colleague or client at work, and they tell me similar things. I'm 36 now, and as time goes on I find this event something I think about more often as the years roll on. Despite becoming more logical and cynical in age, I ponder its significance and proof of otherworldly things living alongside us on this planet. Thanks for listening. When I was 1, I worked as an assistant teacher. I had plans to visit friends in another state and intended to spend the summer there, so I subleased my apartment and stayed with my parents for a couple of weeks before I left. My parents lived in a rural area of Wisconsin, just south of Madison. I really loved to run and would jog in a park near my parents' house after work. This park was basically a mile loop that was uphill for the first third of the trail, then level for the second third, and then downhill for the rest of it. It was heavily wooded, and the upper portion was bordered by a rock quarry. In retrospect, it was stupid to jog there alone. There was a small gravel parking area at the entrance of the trail. I hit the trail after work one day, and on my way uphill, I started to feel a sense of panic. I turned around. It actually started to run back down the way I'd come, but I decided to just complete one loop. I told myself that it was really hot, and I was just not wanting to exercise in the muggy heat of late spring. Even still, I couldn't shake this intense feeling that something was wrong. As I was coming to the end of the loop, I could see the parking area. There was a cargo van parked next to my car. I could see someone in the van, but as I became visible through the trees, they were no longer in the front seat. My car was not locked because there was never anyone at this remote park on a weekday afternoon. There was ample space in the parking area, which made it extra strange that this cargo van was parked right next to me. I decided that I didn't want to risk it, so I ran across the highway and asked the man who was outside on his riding mower to walk me to my car. I explained to him my concern that there was someone possibly hiding in the van, and he agreed to walk me to my car. He made sure I got out of there safely. I don't know what would have happened if I'd not talked myself into completing that one loop. I think my intuition was what was causing me to freak out, and was not the heat. That was my last solo jog ever in an area that wasn't heavily populated. Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed that. If you have a scary story you'd like me to read on the channel, please send me an email. Or post it to my subreddit. You can find details of this in the video description. It's the stories that make this, and this is the best way to ensure variety in the stories I share. Thank you all for listening, and a special thanks to my channel members and patrons who now have special access to Adri videos and other behind-the-scenes content. Angelo PB, Tammy How, Tam R, Rat Braun Electric Beauties, Gloria, Isabella, Frank 0 Byte, Jennifer Fenters, Autumn Moon, Christina Caleri, NXS, The Wondering Triath, Torah Williams, MOX, Roe, Harper Pretty, and Pink, Johnny C, Kim Thompson, Kristen Collins, and Sherry Smith, Felicia Taser, Shannon Evans, Amy Chambers, Adam, Ernest Alexander, Wilson Calamity, Jade, Morin Bound, Gardner, Tyson, Alan, Tyler, Wilson, Alexandria, Bank, It's Me, Ryan, Trevor, Blockley, Cassandra, Bricker, Wyatt, Patty's niece, Ariera, Yashara, L. Deb Foster, Kathleen Greer, Ly Me, Ryan, Chris, Lane, Joe, Jordan, Lise Mendoza, Brooke, Nikki Bundrant, Thomas, Diddle the Tajera, Brooke, Nikki Bundrant, Thomas Diddle, Jennifer Chamberlain, Denise, Watson 0 Byte, Erica Air, Forgotten Ruins, TV Night, Shadow Healing with E. Taisha Castana, Cox, Holy Crusader, Sheila Grant 44, Julie Hinn, Stephanie McLaren, Janet Mills Rice, Bob, Jeff Masterin, Hoy, Denise Watson, Raz, Cassandra Wyatt, Travis Smith, Zoe D, Kat, Phil and Melissa, Lorna Clark, Kathy Richmond, Natasha Hensley, Jalissa Ferguson, Leah McBride, Emily Pearson, Tyler Wilson, Lynn Me, Kristen Burley, Shaz, Betty Brentley, Candace Lee, Africa Winfield, Becca, Lydia Adams, Girl, Veteran Legends, CBZ 69, 2012, Katrina King, Hospital, Cakewalk, Dirty, Diana Quinta, Siegel, Shirley Porch, Taylor Ruist, Anna Lisa Patry, Jasmine Davis, Janelle Jensen, Jasper Roth, Alex, Monica Level, James Gargano, Sarah P. Fire 5, Mad as a Felter, Tiara Sanders, Melissa Kingery, Kitty Cat, Luna 2, Chelsea Mufford, Ryan, Gabrielle, Jenny, Sarah Zepp, Tay, Sarah C, Sam, Amanda Jane, Vampy Debs, October Gypsy, Rebecca, Erica B, Maribel DeLuna, Lloyd Rash, Jennifer Jenkins, Kentucky Townsend, Mary Wright, Tara Harris, Elizabeth Knapp, Eddie Sean Gorman, Sue Gordon, Spiders K, Chrissy Abson, Alice Dina, Kingery, Snowball, Rena, Lady Dreer, Brenda, Pretty Girl 215, Amber Davis, Sigma Cube X, Letitia Acklin, Ollie O'Neill, Gina Eberhardt, Lily Pad, Ashley Nicole, Sarah Chalo May, May 2nd, 2003, Bella Plays 2006, Skin Crawler, Stephanie McLaren, Borderline, Betty Kuro, Top Off, Kelly and Bain, Michael M, Ollie Neal, Kavanaugh, The Dead Movie Society, Diana Johnston, Taya Adwell, Danielle Possum, Posey, Crafty Kell, Brooke, Scott McKenzie, Megan Abrams, Jane Wiggins, Jasmine Davis, Jack White, Your Papy Dilly, Emma, Lisa, Tanya Ferguson, The Wendy Ember, Hops, Alexia Tuttle, Ram Beltron, Elizabeth Mays, Unlady Likey 13, Pegasus Genesis, Sheila Grant 44, Sona Scout, Mom 405, Cheryl Duckworth, Ashley Bray, Angela Reeves, Kim Thompson, Brock Ballard, Nick Bosky, Jessica Lay, Yennefer Clary, Scott Timothy Stratton, Melissa Kingery, Shane Stevens, Serge Vargas Bart, In Real Life, Abel Jordan, Lisa Apprentice, Mason Hayes, Sarah Price, Jasmine Thomas, Angie Linden, Z Harris, Kirby Harris, Waolo Sapia, Elmina Cordelia, Misty Rur, Michelle Green, Dixie Busby Pa, Ferreira Nez, Samantha Place, Donna Cox, Stephen Wheeler, Melissa Mordessa, Edmondson, This Bad, Kitty Gloria, Christina My Way, Connie, Sue Carol, Zano Merciful, Humming, Keela Rundle, Ashley J, Vicky Howell, Joe Noer, Zoe D, Nicholas Johnson, Kimmy Love. Once again, thank you guys for listening. A great night.